listening to the Full Circle Music Show, the why of the music biz. Welcome back to the Full Circle Music Show. This is Chris Murphy, sitting with Mr. Seth Mosley. How you doing, buddy?
I am here, and I am happy to be here.
Me too, man. You know what? I can't really believe that we are sitting down with luminaries of the music industry. Today we've got Tom Douglas on the show. It's incredible.
Tom is a hero to many of our listeners out there, including me.
And me as well. If you don't know who Tom Douglas is, he's written hit songs for Lady Antebellum, Miranda Lambert, Tim McGraw, and the list goes on and on.
And I think he's in the Songwriter Hall of Fame as well, if I'm not mistaken.
You are not mistaken. He is in the Songwriter Hall of Fame. I can't wait for you guys to dive in and hear this interview, so we're going to get to it as soon as possible, but he gave some great takeaways.
Yeah, we're titling our episode today, Vulnerability. And what I got from this conversation was the power and really the necessity of vulnerability in great songwriting.
I think it's key. And instead of giving away too much here, I want you to hear exactly from the horse's mouth. Not calling Tom a horse or anything, but
he's powerful as 1,000 horses. Probably a 10,000 horsepower songwriter.
I like. Ooh, there's a key there for him.
There you go.
Well, welcome back to the Full Circle Music Show with the host, Mr. Seth Mosley, here as always, and the amazing Tom Douglas sitting across from us today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be here. Very glad to be here.
We are just honored to have you, and one of the things that we want to do with the Full Circle Music Show is to kind of shed a light onto the processes and the mindset from those that have had success in the music business, and but just really learn from the experience as well. But I'd love just to hear maybe what was that one thing that sparked your interest as a young guy, or when it comes to songwriting? What is that one thing? Can you picture back then of what it was that really sparked your interest in music?
You know, it's a very good question. I don't know if I can pinpoint one thing. You know, I grew up in a household where you know, songs were really talked about more than artists, more than musicians. My father was he sold steel for a living, but he was really very artistic. But I just remember, you know, he talked a lot about the songs and, you know, and who wrote the songs. And I think, you know, somewhere along the line, just that emphasis, you know, became more interesting to me than the singer, or even, you know, than the record, but just the song itself, just the creation of that, you know, somehow became, I think, imprinted on me at a young age.
Do you feel like from that young age that songs spoke to you in a way that maybe they didn't to your friends or your peers?
Yes, I do. I mean, I think, you know, as you're growing up, you think that your experience, the way that you look at life, is the way that everybody else looks at life, only to find later that, you know, your viewpoint, the way you look at life, is completely different. And, you know, I think I've always seen life in terms of stories and words and, you know, kind of the senses, you know, the sights and the colors and the smells and the tastes and the touches, those things. I think, you know, that's just, you know, the sensory perception maybe heightened in writers more than other people.
Sure. Do you think you could be a successful songwriter and not have that kind of sensory perspective on life?
Well, I mean, you know, today songwriting has evolved into such a multifaceted, endeavor that, I mean, there are some guys that are great songwriters that, you know, I mean, they create the music, you know, or they have a particular thing that they do well with, you know, with electronics. You know, the track has become so preeminent in songs that, you know, I mean, I guess, but, you know, in terms of the pure songwriter that I think historically that we think, you know, the singer-songwriter, from everybody from Jimmy Rogers to, you know, to Bono, to Chris Martin, to, you know, to The Weeknd. I mean, I think probably there is a commonality between all those guys, and I bet all those guys could literally sit down with a guitar or a piano and, kind of break your heart in the room.
That's good. Well, I had the chance to write with you, Tom, a few weeks ago, which was honestly a bit of a, I'm coming from a super fan perspective of a lot of your songs, and was honestly a dream come true for me. And there's a lot of hype around your name, and you get a guy in a room and
As he shifts uncomfortably in a seat.
yeah, exactly.
That's right.
And so you kind of never know what to expect. But I told Chris before we were doing this interview this morning that when you're in a room with Tom, you genuinely feel like you are in a room with a genius. And there's maybe 2 or 3 people.
Slap me now, Chris. Just reach over here and slap me as hard as you can.
Well, I've never slapped a genius before.
me and the artist were kind of vibing on something before he got here, and he shows up with his computer, and it's like, oh, just give me 5 minutes, and then he turns around and spits out the most fantastic song I've ever heard. And it really is true. I mean, you've got a gift for it, but what is more amazing to me is your story of how you kind of got there, and maybe the fact of how long it even took for somebody to, and your perseverance. That's what really struck me. Do you care to elaborate on your story a little bit?
Well, yeah, I will. I mean, I'm honored that you would say that. Those are very nice words. I think honestly, the truth of the matter is, I've thought about this a lot. Kind of the clinical aspect of songs and the study of songs, because I taught lyric writing at Belmont University for 5 years, so I had to really kind of think about the more the black and white aspect of what we do, and honestly, I think what separates successful songwriters from unsuccessful songwriters is, there is obviously you have to have a modicum of talent, but I think we all have a modicum of talent. I don't know that anybody has that much more talent than somebody else. I mean, that's hard to measure. But what I do know, and I think this should give hope to everybody, is successful songwriters are willing to write hundreds and hundreds of bad songs and just fail miserably over and over again. And I think if you're willing to do that, I'm sure that's the case with golf or tennis or with songwriting or with fly fishing. I mean, I think that really is I think that is the one thing that separates success from failure, is just your willingness to do it. And the only way that you can continue to do that, I think, is to focus on the process and not the end result of the song. The song, I think you and I talked about this before, it's kind of a radical concept, but the song in and of itself, to the songwriter, can become the enemy. It becomes the trap. And the song is clearly important, but as soon as the song is created, you really have to jettison the song, and you have to cast it far away, or you will become a prisoner of it. And I know that sounds odd, and I mean, I love the songs I've written, but I have to love them from a sense of detachment and afar, or they will corrupt you. And the successful ones, as well as the ones that never see the light of day. There's just something about it that, the songs are important to the artist and to the publisher and to your livelihood. But, songwriters, I mean, by definition, we write. We have to be really purist in the sense that we have to be process driven.
Yeah.
I've discovered that later. I'm not saying that's absolute. Somebody smarter could probably disagree, but for me, I guess I should have preempted all that with, for me, I've come to really believe that.
Sure. And you say the song can become the enemy. Is that just the fact that, hey, I look back and say, man, I wish I would have done this, or wish I would have done that? Is that kind of what you're speaking to, or how do you? Well,
I mean, so I speak in gross generalizations, but most songs, once a song is written, honestly, most songs for me are surrounded by disappointment. in the sense that people are not going to respond to this song the way that I want them to respond. They're just not. It's impossible. They're far too important to me, and so I guess, to focus on something that I know is going to be anticlimactic and going to be a letdown is, kind of a foolish endeavor. The thing I love writing songs. And once that song is written, it's going to be somehow or another, it's going to be kind of a heartbreak. The process is pure. Everything beyond that for me is impure and somewhat corrupt. And, it's going to be disappointing. Even the song that we wrote, which truly is, it is fantastic. Sure. But nobody, no matter what anybody says, it's surrounded by indecision. You've got so many people and their opinions, and you've got the gatekeepers, and you've got all these things that really can ruin the song. You can lose these songs every step of the way.
Wow, sure.
And so you're just almost waiting for that to happen. So to even go down that. So I have to listen to it a few times, and then, I may never listen to it again, because nothing's going to be as magical to me as the moment in which it was created.
Wow.
Well, you said that's kind of been a recent revelation for you. What would you have told yourself, knowing this now, when you were first starting off as a songwriter? What advice would you have given to your younger self when maybe you did hold on to those songs as these precious children, or these things that were lightning in a bottle and it was too important to give away?
Well, I wish I could have told myself that, don't worry about the song. It's all about the next song. The cliche is, what's your favorite song that you've written? And I think the songwriter has to answer, it's the next song. And, I've cared, too much for literally years. And I think caring too much about the song and people's reaction to the song, it quenches the creative spirit, and it just stops you from doing what it is that you're supposed to do. Songwriters are really, they're like guys on an assembly line where we do, we kind of do one thing. You try to do that well. It's like you put on a bolt on a widget on an assembly line, and you do it year after year after year, and you hopefully get better and quicker, and that's refined. For us, to make that analogy, for that guy on the assembly line to all of a sudden worry about, is the car going to finally get to its destination in Biloxi, Mississippi, and who's going to buy the car? It would almost be that crazy. Sure. So it just takes you out of the moment, and you focus too far down the road, and you lessen you're not going to be as engaged in what you're doing now. It's very hard. I'm not saying it's easy, but for years, you can just chase projects. You can chase, an artist is going to record a song, and, you can write 25 songs for that artist. And, somehow I just think it'd been much better if you'd been like, forget the artist, forget you almost have to forget the business, and just constantly be refining your voice and what it is that you do well.
That's good, man. Yeah, that's for any young songwriter out there, that is amazing words of wisdom. And a question that kind of would go along with that to me, could you even say, before you got your first cut, was it Little Rock? Was that the first cut, or was that the first single that kind of put you on the
that was
map?
the first country song. I had written, in my time in Nashville before, I had almost done work for hire in Christian songwriting.
How do you mean by that?
Well, literally, I was. I did it strictly to make a living.
Sure.
I knew a guy that had a record company, and he had, just dozens of projects a year, and literally, it would be like, this project is coming up with this artist, and we would write sometimes we'd write 3 songs a day with this particular artist, but they were, which was really very good practice. But I don't know, the songs were particularly great.
Sure.
And I mean, we were, our intent was, we were really just kind of churning out a commodity.
Sure.
So I mean, it wasn't a pure relationship. I don't think I ever got. There were no royalties. It was just literally a guy was paying me $1,000 a month to write as many songs as I possibly could.
Wow, what a way into it.
So I mean, that was early on. My first country song that I got recorded was I was 41 years old, and I got Little Rock recorded.
Hold on a second. 41 years old, first big song recorded. That's how many songs had you written in your career until that one happened?
Well, hundreds. Since then, I've written. I counted up the other day. I've written over 1,400 songs in 22 years. So
wow,
I still write about 150 songs a year. I can't stop myself.
Yeah, and that's not to take away, because man, I look back and what I'm thinking is, okay, what is in the? I think of it like BC and AD almost. Like what's in the BC files? There's probably some gold there that that has never come out. But what inspires me is, okay, you had the drive and tenacity to keep going regardless of what commercial success said. It was just that you were going to do it anyway.
Well, I ultimately, my breakthrough was now at age 40, when, I'd tried everything else. I tried to quit songwriting. I had tried to embrace songwriting. And it literally, it haunted me and finally hunted me down. I told you I had this spiritual epiphany one day. I was about 40 and I was working in real estate, and I was at the time, I was engaged in kind of a real estate conversation with a prospective tenant. And at this time I was having this conversation with this tenant about moving to a shopping center that I leased, I was having the same conversation with God, which was, it just seems odd that at age 40 I would have this desire and interest and passion for songwriting, only to become jaded, cynical, and perverse at age 40. That just seems like an odd plan for God, which you think, which we know as means well for us, and loves us. It just seemed odd, and at that moment, God answered with, well, you've chosen to worship the creation, which is the song, versus worshiping me, the creator. So look at where you've become. You've become jaded, cynical, and a cynic at age 40 because you're worshiping this inanimate object. So I'm sure a psychologist would tie my distrust of the song kind of back to that moment, because I see where that got me. So I have, the songs can become idols, and you worship them. So anyway, I think at that moment I tried to forsake the idol in the song and refocus my attention on God, the creator. And when I did that, I kind of regained my love and the gift of songwriting. And at that point, a few months went by, and I said, well, why don't I try just sitting down and telling the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth for once. And over a period of a couple of weeks, I started working on a song called Little Rock, which was about a recovering alcoholic who was starting over again. Although I wasn't in Little Rock, and I'm not a recovering alcoholic, I'm certainly recovering from many other, addictions. So I get it, and I constantly have felt like I'm starting over. So at age 40, it was like that was just a metaphor, an autobiographical metaphor for my life. I think I'm on a roll here in a Little Rock. The guy's trying to convince himself and this woman that he's left. I'm solid as a stone. Wait and see. I got just one small problem here in Little Rock. Without you, baby, I'm not me.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, that is true. Now let's start from there. So,
yeah.
Was it difficult when you did have that epiphany and starting to walk down that line of, and not that you didn't write from experience before, but that kind of raw writing experience that then turned into a successful piece of songwriting for you. Was that hard to do in the beginning, to be that raw?
Well, it was, yes, it is. It was hard. I mean, I think, by virtue of the fact that I was 40, that I was finally able to do it. But honestly, it was such a relief. It was a great relief. I mean, I'm constantly asking myself, why can't I get back to that place of vulnerability and rawness and honesty that I did at that moment? Those moments are high water marks, but they're fleeting. It's just hard to keep your arms around it, to grasp it. That's why I'm, 22 years later, I'm still kind of seeking that feeling, that sense of vulnerability. If I knew how to do it, I would absolutely tell you, and I would do it again. I don't. It's a constant journey.
Well, it seems like it would be pretty exhausting if you were in that place all the time.
Well, yes. Yeah. I mean, it's almost like an actor, I guess, kind of getting in a role. You can't stay there. I think that's a good point, which makes me feel better why I haven't been able to, reach that moment again.
Where do you go in those moments where maybe those emotions aren't as easy to tap into, but you still have to put pen to paper and write a song today?
Well, I almost always start lyrically, and I think I really don't know how to answer that, and I think the only thing that I know to do is just keep doing it. It's just I am consistent. I write every day, just not really because I want to. It's just I literally have to. So my process has nothing to do with songwriting, but I have to get up at a certain time. I have to exercise. I have to read the Bible. I have to read 2 to 3 newspapers. I like to have a book of fiction constantly going, and if I do that, somehow or another, I have a number of things always to write about. So I've never had writer's block. I think that's a misnomer. I don't even believe in that. I believe if you just stay vigilant in your process, the ideas will be there.
Yeah. So how do you pound through writer's block? You just write.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's just that's almost like somebody saying the terrible twos with children.
Right.
It's like those are I don't like putting that on us, on anybody. It's those things. It's hard enough to do without, I just don't believe in that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
If you write, you can't have writer's block. So it's not always going to be great. But again, that gets back to it takes such courage to be able to write something that's terrible. It really does. Mm-hmm. That's why most people can't do this. The mindset of a writer is, it's a fragile thing. You have to be amazingly vulnerable and raw, but you also have to have incredible courage. So it's a rare combination. And people really that don't do it or know writers, they really underestimate the skill set that it takes to do this. Particularly for long periods of time. It is certainly not for the faint of heart.
We have a sign in our studio that says "Dare to Suck."
Yes, right. Yeah.
and that is something that we live by.
Well, yeah, and it's it never gets easier. I get nervous every time I sit down with somebody that I don't know particularly well, which is it's just I think this is great, but just nobody naturally likes rejection,
right.
And writers by nature are very insecure and just unsure of ourselves, but at the same time, we're confident enough to keep putting ourselves out. So it's an odd tension that you have to that's an unresolvable tension in which we have to live.
Mm-hmm.
For those that are listening now, or your students at Belmont, what advice would you give to them to cultivate that? Because again, you are, as artistic people, it is a very vulnerable place to go.
Yeah.
And if, I myself have that issue of not wanting to put myself out there because I don't want to be judged.
Right.
But yet that's where the goodness comes from a lot of times.
Yeah. I just think it takes it takes practice, and I think acknowledging that as a weakness or as a desire is the first step, and then just really again. I think it's discipline. The discipline of doing this consistently. The only thing that I'll never understand is you take some of the greatest music, certainly of my era, which, I grew up really listening to music in the in the '60s, until now. Some of the music that truly I love the most, allegedly, people wrote on heroin, and drug-induced stupors, sure. And Jack Daniel's rum-sake binges. I don't know that. I do not understand, and because to me it takes such discipline and vigilance to do this on a daily basis that I can't. I don't know that I can really reconcile that unless, and I'm talking almost to myself. I'm answering my own question, but I guess it's discipline and vigilance to me that leads to that kind of austere place of vulnerability. And I guess obviously for other people, it's alcohol and drugs that lead to that. We all really are attempting to get to the same place of kind of self-revelation where you get yourself out of the way. I do it through discipline and process. They do it through, unmasking their insecurities. Somehow they think, drugs and alcohol open themselves up. So I guess we're ultimately trying to get to the same place, but it's odd that the endeavor to do that would be so, diametrically opposed.
Yeah, I guess, and this is in no way an endorsement of that lifestyle or getting to that place, but I guess for some people it takes that much to break the wall down.
Yes. So yeah, ultimately that's So yeah, we're trying to break that wall down, the wall of resistance. The resistance is constantly everywhere around us, and there's a great book called The War of Art. And he just names it. He says, screenwriters, playwrights, actors, songwriters, doesn't matter. It is the resistance. That is the enemy. And I think it almost helps sometimes just naming it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was going to ask, because you said you're constantly reading, and I'm, at this point in my life, become a bit of a book nerd. And I always like to know, okay, well, what... who do I know in my life that's a genius? Okay, Tom Douglas is a genius. What is he reading?
Do not say that again. We're gonna have to delete that.
What is Tom Douglas reading nowadays?
Well, let's see. Great books this year I've read. I read The Goldfinch, which won the Pulitzer Prize in 2014. I read the All the Light We Cannot See, which won the Pulitzer Prize in 2015. I've read recently, Unbroken. I've read. I'm reading a book now called Moonwalking with Einstein. That's about memory.
Wow.
I'm getting ready to start. Let's see. Well, I've got so many books going that now I really can't remember exactly. The books, but through the years, I love the classics. I love John Steinbeck. I probably read The Grapes of Wrath every year. Wow. I love The Great Gatsby. The Faulkner and the Steinbecks and the Hemingways and the Fitzgeralds. I just, Flannery O'Connor. I love those works. And then anything that's been notable that's won a prize, something like a Pulitzer is usually you can't go wrong with that.
Mm-hmm. And to me, what I hear, at this point, you've had some pretty significant songs in your resume, from Lady Antebellum, Run to You, obviously Little Rock, The House That Built Me, which is probably my favorite one in your impressive resume. You never stop learning. You're still reading. You're always constantly, what else can I take in? And
Yeah.
that's inspiring.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's just we've constantly have to fill the tank with hopefully great stuff. We want to be as in tune to what's happening in the culture as possible.
Yeah.
And it seems like that's something that, from what I hear you saying, that if you're going to put yourself out there and empty the tank, you've got to fill it back up with some quality stuff.
Yeah, that's good, Chris. Yeah, it's. I think that's why we do it. And I think just reading. There's just no substitute. What people through the years will say. Give me one book on songwriting, and I would say virtually everybody that's listening to this or wherever you go, you already know everything there is to know about songwriting. Songwriting is, I mean, the premise of it is really pretty simple. I mean, it's words and it's music, and people know how to write songs. But when you read, if you get to the end of The Grapes of Wrath, in the scene with Rose of Sharon, as she's lost a child and she's nursing, a man that's about to die. I mean, just that scene right there is, I don't know. There's so many moments, or the very end of The Great Gatsby, where the green light is, beating against the waves. I mean, those things, they just inspire so much. I mean, they're mini movies, and. So yeah, I just think reading really is the key.
Yeah. No, that's good, man.
That's incredible. I mean, for me, when I first started looking at the music industry or being in a band or something like that, I was like, well, okay, if we want to do this thing, we need to write 10 songs,
right?
And then we'll get them recorded, and then we'll go out on the road. And and so to hear the process and the discipline, as you say, is way more involved and a life pursuit.
Yes.
Other than just let's put together a couple of ditties and then strike it rich.
Well, I mean, I guess, but honestly, if you talk to, I could bring in a slew of guys that are really far more successful than I am, and I would dare say, if whatever I've just espoused, they would probably think it's laughable. I mean, because I think my process is, there's a part of me, the large part, I try not to care too much if somebody else is going to like this. The thing that's important to me is that my collaborators like it. I'm always trying to impress the guys in the room. I really want them to love what we do. And if they love it, maybe somebody else will. But, you can't afford to care too much about what other people think, except the people, with whom you're creating.
And is that something intuitive that you can feel? Like, because somebody can say, well, I've got Tom Douglas in the room, I can't really say I don't like this. And so, yeah, this is great. Thanks so much.
Yes. Yeah. That honestly, you have a little bit of success and, again, there's so many hindrances to it. Your success can be, one of your greatest hindrances because, I mean, people will say they like it and they really don't. What you really want them to do is to love it. But I think you can pretty much tell that. You certainly don't want to bring your ego into a room. I've gotten to know some very famous songwriters, and the ones like I got to know Waylon Jennings honestly pretty well towards the end of his life, and Harlan Howard, who was kind of one of the deans of songwriting in Nashville. And both those guys, when you were in a room with them, you were back to 16-year-olds just making stuff up. They did not bring their ego into the room, which was a great relief because it's just that there's not enough room for the song if you've got two clashing egos. But that honestly that rarely happens. I think mainly because people they do respect and they do honor the songwriting process. They know how hard it is.
Well, one of the reasons I think that we wanted to start this podcast was to be able to speak to experience and to hear that. And so the fact that you can be in a room with Waylon and other accomplished songwriters over the years and to glean a little bit here and there to go, okay, that's how that's done. Or, oh, you don't have to be so precious with every little thing. Any other experiences that you that come to mind of those little things that a light bulb came on for you?
Well, gosh, let's see. I think it's just, you have to constantly keep moving. You want to keep moving the ball down the field, but at the same time, I think you want to stop occasionally and give your co-writer, a moment of sanity without constantly talking, or sometimes the silence or the spaces can really propel a song. You have to find those moments. Some people get very nervous with silence. They get very nervous just, if they're not contributing something.
Sure.
So you got to find those moments of, moving and discussion, but also you got to find those moments where you got to just let it sit and marinate for a few minutes and then, come back together.
Well, is that, I mean, on my end of things, I mean, how we always talk about serving the process and serving the artists and serving their vision. So much of it is listening rather than speaking, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's just key. I mean, and I need to do. I'm glad you said that. I need to do a better job of that. I think that's great.
Yeah, I mean, I just think at the end of the day, it is the artist who's going to go out and do the radio tours, and they're going to sing the songs from stage every night, and they're going to be the ones championing the song at the end of the day. So
right.
I think we can do ourselves a disservice by, talking too much or whatever. But
yes, right, and you want to incorporate as much of your, you write with a lot of artists. I do some. I don't write that much.
Sure.
And sometimes that can be tricky because sometimes, as a songwriter, you want to serve the song, but at the same time, if it is with an artist, you realize, they kind of have to serve their career. So sometimes that's not the best thing for the song.
Sure.
But
and do you make that conscious choice of, you said you don't do it as much with artists. Are you writing more with other collaborating co-writers these days and more in the process of pitching songs, or?
Well, it's probably half and half. I mean, it certainly does, enhance the ability to get a song recorded if you're writing with the artist. But, sometimes it doesn't. At the end of the day, artists have to have great songs, and most of the successful artists I know are smart enough to know they really don't care where the song comes from. They don't care if they've written it or not. In country music, the Kenny Chesneys, the Tim McGraws, the Keith Urbans, they really don't care. It's just, they want to, they just want a great something that they can wrap their artistry around.
Do you think that's unique to country music? Because I think it's a lot less common in definitely in the Christian music industry and in maybe even in pop.
Yeah.
It seems like the writers are pretty much always on the songs.
Well, yes. I don't really have that much experience beyond country.
Sure.
But I mean, just looking at the charts, I think you're correct. Some of that could honestly just be political. The artist may or may not have that much to do with the creation of the song, but for political expediency, sometimes people's names get on songs where they're not always warranted. But
so you're saying there's politics in the music industry?
I have heard there's politics in the music business. I've not really experienced that firsthand, but I've heard about that.
Interesting. Music politics.
That'll be your next podcast.
Yeah, exactly. The politics of music.
Man, I feel like we could talk for days, but I'm sure you have other things to do.
Well, I've enjoyed being with you immensely.
This has been incredible. I felt like I've been taken to school as well, and of life and songwriting.
I hope not the woodshed, but
you know what? I really do hear so much of what you're saying as far as to be able to empty that well. I think you mentioned it, to empty the tank. so much of that is to be able to fill it back up with some quality stuff.
Yeah.
And that's incredible. That's sound wisdom for whatever art it is, whether you're a comedian or a filmmaker or you're a visual artist or a songwriter, that if you're not filling that back up, and you're hitting that writer's block, so to speak, then no wonder.
Yes. Well, and I mean, for songwriters, songwriting, I mean, it is, it's our prayer. Really, it's our way that we almost get back to God. It's the way that God speaks to us. And, I mean, the first verse in the Bible, in the beginning, God created. So it's, it's such a, it's a communal experience that, it is. I mean, it's full circle. It should be. I mean, you have to empty out and then you have to come back. I mean, it's 360. It's kind of the name of your podcast here, but it's it has to keep replenishing itself.
Yeah, we'll pay you for that.
Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
that commercial endorsement.
From 1993 with the Colin Ray singles to 2015, as we're wrapping up, I'm sure the music industry has changed a lot in that 22 years, and it's only changing faster by the second. Something to kind of leave the listeners with, because I always want to get your take on, it seems like guys who've been in it for a long maybe aren't as rattled and maybe as doom and gloom about the music industry as some people who have just gotten into it. I mean, what's your outlook on where we're at today and where we're heading?
Well, the economic landscape of music, I think it does, particularly for guys your age. And I have a daughter who's 25 that's writing, so it can look dire with music is all about distribution, and really it always has been. And the distribution now is in streaming, so I just have to believe. I mean, I am involved in some lobbying campaigns. The Nashville Songwriters Association, the NMPA, the National Music Publishers Association. For songwriters and publishers, those are two groups, along with your PROs, that you really need to support and make your voice known. This is the time to not go gently into the good night. This is a time really to try to disrupt and make our voices known to the Department of Justice and to your senators and your Congress people about we've got to get some government relief. In a sense, we got to get the government out of our business. We're operating under consent decrees and copyright laws that were made from the World War II era, and 3/4 of our income is government regulated. It's so maddening and so frustrating. The good news is, though, it at least it's being discussed, but everybody needs to be acquainted with the facts, and you need to make those that are in power, like if you were to contact your BMI, ASCAP, or CSAC, they would absolutely want you to write a letter, and they could kind of give you the template to do that. So songwriters really need to get organized and get together as a community, get educated, and advocate for the copyright.
So, and you kind of answered it a bit, but if I'm a songwriter or a creative out there, really even outside of just the writing part, because the producers out there as well are affected, how do we get involved in maybe what you're doing as far as lobbying, and what groups do we need to join? What events do we need to be at? How do we join that?
Well,
cause?
The one group that I tell everybody that they really should join is the NSAI, the Nashville Songwriters Association International.
Even if you're not in Nashville, join it.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is a worldwide organization, and they are the lobbyists, the voice, the advocates for songwriters. They're up in Washington, D.C. 2 to 3 times a month, and it's a nominal fee to join. But it's money well spent. They have an amazing online presence. You can come to Nashville a couple of times a year, and the whole community in Nashville, the songwriting community, embraces them. I occasionally will go to New York or California and work with local groups there, but that's the one thing that we ought to do, because it's, again, your future is really hangs in the balance. To quote from To Kill a Mockingbird, the discussion is the little girl asked, the Atticus Finch, is the father figure in To Kill a Mockingbird, and he says, it's a sin to kill a mockingbird, because a mockingbird only wants to do one thing: it's just sing. And so, it's an apt metaphor for the struggle facing songwriters, which is, it's a sin to kill the songbird, because the songbird only wants to do one thing. We just want to make music. But, if we don't get some of these laws changed, the songbird is not going to be able to make a living, and the world will grow strangely quiet.
Yeah. Well, I always think of music as, Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. I would tend to put music as a basic human need.
Yes,
I think
absolutely.
it's going to be as essential and is as essential as air, food, shelter,
Amen.
safety. And I was encouraged recently, a couple weeks ago, our governor, Haslam, and his wife hosted a songwriters dinner at their house that we were both at. And just to see even the priority to set aside an evening
Yes.
to honor songwriters and to hear from songwriters, at least in the state of Tennessee, was encouraging.
Very encouraging.
For where we're headed. So I'm really, really thankful for guys like you spearheading that cause, and I'm going to do everything that I can do, and I'm sure we'll use our podcast as a platform to try to rally that cause as well too. So
absolutely.
But yeah, thank you so much for
Enjoyed it.
the time today.
Enjoyed it. Thank
This was
you
a
for
pleasure.
having me.
Yeah, this was enlightening as well as entertaining.
Well, I enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Yes, indeed. Hey, we hope you've enjoyed this episode and will join us again soon on the Full Circle Music Show, the why of the music biz.
Check us out at fullcirclemusic.org/podcast.